Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Esposito, and today I'm thrilled to have Doug Stevens join me for this retail reset conversation. Now, I don't think I need to do a big introduction to Doug Stevens, who he is or what he does. I think we all know him. We rely on his insights, his best practices, his learnings, especially around, what the future of the store looks like, what the future of the customer experience looks like. But of course, we are in uncertain times right now. We're all kind of navigating a new reality, new sources of disruption, the acceleration of new trends. So my goal today is to really pick Doug's brain, get a feel for what he's seeing, what he's paying close attention to, and moreover, what his predictions may be for the future to help you all out there watching prepare. Doug, thanks so much for taking the time out.
It's my pleasure, Alicia. Thanks for having me.
So like I said in my little setup there, you obviously have such a rich history, not only analyzing what's happening in retail, but speaking with retail executives, commentating on what's happening at the industry at large. I myself in Retail Touchpoints have turned to you as a voice around disruption, what the forces are, the key forces that retailers need to navigate, forces of change, forces of competitiveness. But obviously, this is completely new territory for many people watching right now. So, I mean, what's your take as far as if we were to have a disruption meter, right, of everything retail has been navigating over the past few years? Where does this kind of fall in terms of, disruptiveness, the level of disruption and I guess the longevity of it, right? I mean, what are we looking at here, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and part of the exercise, I suppose, in analyzing what's going on and trying to determine what's likely to happen, what we're likely to see in the market. Part of the challenge is sort of quantifying the scale and scope of this crisis, as you just pointed out. And so you sort of look around for reference points, right? Well, are there characteristics of 9/11 that we could look at? What about the financial crisis? What about previous recessions? And then ultimately you get led back to the 1918 pandemic to see if there's any sort of historical clues. What's unique about this crisis is that we really have, I suppose, two dynamic situations taking place at once. You have the health crisis, clearly, which so many countries around the world are still struggling with. And then we have this other unknown, which lies on the other side of the health crisis, which becomes the economic crisis. And there's a point in time where those two things are going to be completely blurred. But ultimately, they're both going to have an effect. So in terms of the scale of this, I mean, certainly that the scale is global. I personally have never seen anything in my career that has affected literally every single business model, every vertical, every profession, every market, every category, the way that this has. And then the likelihood, of course, of a follow-on recession is the next shoe to drop. And that's going to bring all kinds of other consequences to the market. But I think what's really interesting to me is that, Warren Buffett, I think, famously said that when the tide goes out, you can tell who is swimming naked. And in so many respects, we're seeing that play out now. We're seeing it play out on a national level. Certainly, we're seeing which countries were very well prepared for this crisis, which countries sort of went through a logical series of steps to take care of the crisis. And then on the other hand, we're seeing those countries that were not prepared, that don't have sufficient health systems and resources to manage this crisis, maybe don't have the stock of personal protective equipment that they should have. Well, exactly the same scenario is playing out in the retail sector as well. We are finding out now who was swimming naked, which brands were too dependent on China for consumption, which brands were too dependent on China and Asia in general for manufacturing, which brands were too reliant on physical retail to drive the lion's share of their revenue, which brands had cash in the bank for just this kind of crisis. So all of those revelations now are also coming to the market. So this has had, there were a lot of cracks in the foundation of the retail industry before, but COVID-19 has really brought those into sharp contrast.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the difference between the brands that were relying too heavily on stores and the ones that were a bit more leveled in terms of their prioritizing both in store and digital. Because I mean, the reality now is digital is all we have, right? And that's something that I've been covering personally, especially from a marketing and service perspective, because we are seeing some really innovative use cases of brands that are trying to connect through those channels and trying to pivot creatively. I think a lot of the times, like I'm thinking of like a Glossier or a Lululemon, they already have that strong heritage of connecting to the consumer in an authentic way, and digital is just a way of doing that. So I guess my question for you is this essentially going to be a new prong in retailer strategy? Is there going to be an emphasis on digital service, digital experience, now that online again is such a critical component of how people connect and shop more so than ever before?
Yeah, it's definitely a turning point. And I think, there's been a lot of talk lately in the retail community about the acceleration factor here, that a lot of the things we're seeing happening now in sort of a makeshift way are things that would have happened eventually. I mean, we've been predicting here at Retail Profit, we've been talking at least for the last 7 or 8 years about the idea that by as early as 2033, that was our predicted date, we would see the majority of our online daily routine consumption going online, or I should say our daily consumption going online, as opposed to this sort of 85-15 split right now that we have between physical retail and digital retail. In fact, physical stores over the last decade have proven to be a relatively inefficient means of distribution. We spent about the last 100 years centralizing supply chains, centralizing distribution. And in fact, we now live in a world where stores are not the convenience that they once were. They bring all kinds of costs. They bring all kinds of operational complexity, and ultimately, if anything, they constrain distribution. And we're seeing that playing out right now. So we've been out there in front of this thing for a long time, saying that we're going to come to a point where there will literally be no reason to go to a store other than the entertainment factor, the education factor, or just the social pleasure of doing so. And we're starting to see that prophecy at least coming true now, albeit in a way that no one at least anticipated.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because, what we're noticing now, especially, is there's a bit of a fork in the road, right? Like there are the retailers that were so laser focused on the experience, entertainment, and community component of the in-store experience. They obviously don't have a stake in the game right now. They can't do anything, right? Stores are closed. But now we're seeing the essential retailers, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Home Depots, really set a new precedent as far as the fulfillment experience. So the store is still central to their business right now, and they're implementing or ramping up their services, their offerings, to meet consumers where they are, when they need a product, and I think it's showing what's really possible, especially, in an urgent need, or at an urgent need. So I guess my question for you is, and I've seen you speak a few times, you've covered a lot around the future of the store. So do you think there's going to be a bit of a split between these retailers that are going to continue to prioritize like the community building side, the entertainment side of the store, and then those utility focused type retailers? Or do you think retail in general is going to be like, shoot, we really need to be focusing on this fulfillment experience, so in case consumers do come to expect that, we're prepared?
Right. I think that this it's a really good question, and I think there will be multiple strategies playing out in the market depending on the weaknesses, the relative weaknesses of various brands and retailers. But the fact of the matter is, I think what we're going to see is a push towards making sure that businesses are resilient in the aftermath of this. So if we have a business, for example, that is wholly reliant on physical stores, and I'm thinking of Beta, a startup that came into the market about 5 or 6 years ago. Phenomenal concept. The idea that they create a tech showroom that consumers can go in, they can engage with products, they can get information, and ultimately Beta was generating revenue by selling data to the brands that had their products in their showrooms. And so it was a sort of data as revenue play. A brand like Beta must be considering now, how do we make money if our showrooms are completely shut down? So how do they wean themselves off that reliance on physical retail? For other retailers, it may be brands like Walmart that have made great strides in terms of pursuing an omni-channel strategy. For those brands, it may be, how can we make our physical distribution more efficient? How can we truly perfect buy online, pick up in store? These sorts of things. So I think that the imperatives are going to be different for different brands, but fundamentally, I think that every brand has to be saying to themselves right now, how can we be sure that we can sell every single product in our lineup online to a customer wherever, whenever that customer needs that product, without a reliance on physical distribution? And there will also be, of course, a rethink around physical distribution. I mean, the store as an experience, which makes perfect sense in a pre-COVID world. What does that look like in a post-COVID world, where a consumer may now all of a sudden be hesitant to touch a product that thousands of other customers have handled, or hesitant to touch a touch screen because they see a fingerprint on it that looks, oddly suspicious in a post-pandemic world. So there's going to be a rethink, I think, on what online looks like, on what in-store looks like, but ultimately the online shopping experience, I think, is what we're really going to see evolve significantly going forward. I mean, the truth of the matter is the online shopping experience as we know it today is basically catalog shopping in a digital format. But what we've also seen is that as we've been sort of cloistered in our homes, is that we also need social interaction. How much fun would it be to be able to go shopping with a friend right now, as opposed to shopping online still being this relatively solemn and solitary exercise? So I think we're going to see the introduction, a much, much greater introduction of things like virtual stores. The blending of video conferencing and e-commerce, I think, is something that looks almost inevitable at this point with the exposure that people have had to video conferencing. The advent of augmented reality. So a lot of the things that were maybe in the margins for retailers that they were playing with, toying with, making sort of tacit investments in, I think you're going to see a full court press now on building those capabilities into the business from an e-commerce standpoint. And I think, to be honest with you, I think Amazon may be the company that truly leads the way in that respect as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know, for so long we've been talking about this through the lens of the store, right? How do we make the store more digitally enabled, more connected, more smart, so to speak to the new digital behaviors of consumers? So you're saying it's almost going to be a flip-flop, that, a lot of people may be a bit more hesitant to go in store. So how can we take those principles, the magic of the in-store experience, to digital? So it's kind of, we're kind of reverse engineering this. Is that what you think is going to be happening?
Yeah, that's precisely what I see happening. I mean,
Okay.
I think that this has basically put into extremely sharp contrast for brands that they have to get to a place where consumers can not just shop for pure acquisition or consumption, but that they can also shop for entertainment and incorporate social into that as well, because shopping is a social exercise in many respects. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see a renaissance as it applies to online. sort of a second revolution, if you will, of online shopping relative to what we experience today. But we're also going to have to see a rethink on the physical side of retail as well, around this whole notion of experiential. How do we draw consumers in? But how can we also give them a sense of safety and assurance that we are taking the right steps to make sure that that they are safe in a world where consumers are going to be hypersensitive, I think. I mean, it's funny. I was actually watching a movie on Netflix the other night, and there was a crowded room of people in one scene, and people with, talking really closely with one another. And immediately my first reaction was, that just doesn't look right. In a really short period of time, I think we've sort of become sensitized in a really remarkable way to this notion of just being close to people, being in public, touching things that other people have touched. And that's going to be a hangover, I think, that's going to last for some time. So there's going to have to be a fundamental rethink of both the online and offline experiences. And yes, the online experience is going to start to look a lot more like the offline experience.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think for the in-store experience, especially, this could probably be broken into a few different layers, like the more short-term, possibly high impact, moves like adding more hand sanitizer to stores, like you said, kind of mitigating or eliminating like the touch screens. The fitting room experience kind of comes to mind as something that people may be like a little uncertain about, and then more long term, which is, what does this mean for in-store events, that everyone was talking about for a while, or in-store classes, how does this scale in the long term? So is there anything else that retailers need to be thinking about? I mean, I'm sure it varies from strategy to strategy, or even the category that a retailer falls into, but what can everyone watching now be thinking about? Because I feel like now's the time to kind of have that reset, no pun intended.
Yeah, yeah, and then I think it is a reset. I think it's important for retailers to understand that right now, as we speak, well, pre-COVID, let's say, there was about $3 trillion being transacted online, and that represents a small portion, of course, of what the total retail market looks like out there. It's about $27 trillion of retail globally. What retailers across the board need to understand is that every brand on earth is going to be going after that $27 trillion in retail volume that sits out there that is still available and not being transacted online. So the approach to online is going to become far more aggressive. Brands are going to be looking for ways to sell everything with 100% confidence online, whether it's homes in the real estate market, furniture, automobiles. I mean, we've already seen tremendous progress from brands like Carvana in the automobile sector. We're going to see more effort to really make it so that I can buy anything I want without ever having to go to a showroom or a store. What that means for retailers that will still have a significant investment in brick and mortar retail is that they have to reconsider why anyone would even want to go to their stores. This is going to become an even more urgent question in the aftermath of COVID-19. What do you have to do to get people excited about coming to your stores? What valuable reason do you have to give them that's going to compel them to do so? So yeah, there's going to be a new sense of urgency, I think, across the market.
That's great. And I have to ask, since you brought up you were watching something on Netflix and there were people close together, and it was like a little uncertainty, a little panic, and the reality that might not even happen anymore. So what do you think that means for malls? Because I mean, already there's that sense of panic, right? Because a lot of the retailers they rely on from a real estate perspective have their own struggles, right? Some uncertainties there, but there's also their gathering places, right? Either indoor or outdoor. And some developers have been trying to say, this is an experience, this is entertainment for a place. It's a place for people to come together. It's a watering hole. Now that idea makes some people uncomfortable. So, I mean, what does that mean for them from a strategic standpoint?
I think it's going to be a very difficult time for shopping centers. I mean, there's really no way to candy coat this. The fact of the matter is, until there's a vaccine for this virus, life just doesn't go back to normal here. We're going to have to, in all likelihood, live with some degree or some form of social distancing, some sort of intervention or modification of our behavior. Otherwise, we're going to risk going right back into the situation that we find ourselves in right now. So if we use the CDC guidelines for the introduction of a vaccine, what that looks like in practicality, we're probably looking at somewhere in mid-2021 for the introduction of a vaccine. So really, until that happens, yes, people may dip a toe back in the waters of the shopping center or the malls. Malls are going to have to obviously employ significant measures of social distancing and protection, and we may see PPE being worn by people in stores as consumers start to reintroduce into those environments. But until there's a vaccine, there is no return to normal. Post-vaccine, eventually in the course of time, I think that consumers will gravitate back to those spaces. I mean, we are social animals, and we need that. We need that social interaction. And as much as I'm enjoying our conversation right now, it doesn't put us in the same room. It doesn't give us that sense of intimacy that we might have if we were just together having this conversation. So I do believe we're going to see a return, but we have to be remarkably honest and clear about this, and that is to say that this is not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a fair point. All of our conversations we've been having thus far, despite the uncertainty and all of the factors at play, a lot of people are saying this isn't just, a V, or, we're down here and it's going to go right back up. It's going to be a very gradual process to, get people, even if they get to where they were, or just feel some level of comfort being out and about again. But I do want to get into, some of the positives, if we can even say that have come out of this. I mean, we talked about the essential retailers really leveling up, stepping up their fulfillment experiences, but there have been a lot of cases of businesses really rising to the occasion, pivoting strategically from a business standpoint. Some companies manufacturing hand sanitizer because their other products are not in demand. Companies and designers like Christian Siriano creating face masks, to fill needs. And obviously these are more immediate signs of innovation. But would love to hear your take on what these cases may show to the retail executives watching, as far as what's possible, as far as strategic pivoting, finding new business opportunities and models. Because I think, in light of all of these, what ifs right now, I think people want to feel a bit more in control of their destiny and figure out how can we move forward. So, I mean, what do these cases kind of prove, or what are the lessons that others watching may be able to apply?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if any business comes away from this crisis having learned nothing, that really and truly is the tragedy. This is an extremely teachable moment. Prior to this whole crisis unfolding, our approach has always been, when we work with businesses, to ask essentially two questions. And the first question is, if you were unable for any reason to either sell or derive profitability from your core product or category, what could you do instead? What's the big idea behind your brand that could encompass more things than just what you consider to be your core product? We've always been adamant about executives proactively thinking about that, considering what their options are, so that if they do get into a situation where there is a threat, whether it's a geopolitical threat, a medical threat, or just a competitive threat, they don't have to all of a sudden try to innovate in the midst of crisis but they have some plans, again, sort of written into the margins of the things that they could possibly pivot to. So innovate before you have to is number one. The second piece is that, we've heard a lot of people, all the way up to heads of state in this crisis, say nobody could have seen this coming. Nobody would have ever imagined that this could happen. Well, in fact, that is not true. There have been people like Bill Gates and many, many others, including people within government structures, that have been saying for the better part of a decade that this was almost inevitable, what we're going through right now. It was just a question of what form would it take and what would the spread rate and the lethality of this virus be. But the idea that there would be a pandemic was not something that was completely out of left field. So businesses, I was speaking with an expert in crisis communication the other day, and he was saying, Intel, for example, had a standing committee on pandemics. I mean, it was just a committee that met for years and sort of considered information, considered the probability or the likelihood that this could happen. And I'm sure that they were just one of many standing committees within Intel that would have been looking at different potential black swans. I think the other lesson in this is that businesses have to be scenario planning all the time. They need to be looking at the horizon, looking for potential disruptions that may sit outside the norm, that won't be just product category or legislative disruptions, but true global disruptions. And they need to start planning for those things now, as opposed to just waiting for them to come along.
Yeah, I think those are some fantastic points, Doug. And I think that allows everyone watching to kind of take a step back, start to craft their path, for moving forward. And I know we mentioned earlier, some brands, some retailers, their future kind of hangs in the balance right now. But I guess my question for you is, are turnarounds possible here? And if so, I mean, what's really required? I mean, what do these brands need to do? Of course, there are some financial implications for some retailers, but as far as, pivoting successfully, developing a strategy that kind of ticks all these boxes that we've gone through in our conversation today. I mean, how can we kind of get some of these companies on the right path?
Yeah, I sort of think there are three classes of companies right now in the market, and we're seeing sort of the fallout affect each of the three classes quite differently. So we have the legacy retailers who really have entered this crisis on an extremely shaky foundation. And here I'm obviously thinking of the J.C. Penney's of the world, the Macy's of the world, HBC's, largely department store players. But I mean, we could include Gap in that equation as well. Just really a lot of retailers that have sort of been clinging to the mid-tier desperately, but really don't have the solid foundation of great brand equity or cash in the bank to make it through this crisis. And we're going to see fallout in that category. We're already seeing it with Neiman Marcus declaring bankruptcy just the other day. There will be many, many more. That's the unfortunate part. But in some respects, as I've said before, it's not really retail dying, it's retail shedding its skin. And that can be a good thing. As much as I feel for the human tragedy that could be involved in a lot of people at J.C. Penney not returning to those jobs, it also opens up space for new green shoots in the retail market, new concepts, new ideas. And the fact of the matter is, in any crisis, what we have seen historically is that some of the largest and most successful companies and concepts in history, in commercial history, have been developed during just such a crisis. So, even companies like GE, for example, are the product of economic downturns and disruption. So we'll see some legacy retailers drop off. We'll see other retailers pivot into unique space. We talked about pivots like the move to make hand sanitizers, which is great. Making facial masks, awesome. But we've seen some other real hardcore business pivots as well. We've seen Uber now move into parcel delivery. We've seen Airbnb say, hey, what about online experiences? Maybe you can take a class or learn how to do something, experience something online. So there are also businesses that are saying, look, we really need to question the core model of what we do, and we need to offer something that isn't so wholly reliant on physical experiences.
Oh, that's great, Doug. Some really fantastic insights. I think we covered so much ground, and it's always enlightening just to hear your unique perspective because you have such a rich history, again, analyzing what's happening in the marketplace, uncovering new ideas, new opportunities, and providing that strategic framework or way for business leaders to move forward. So thank you again so much for taking the time out. Before I let you go, are there any parting words, tips, recommendations for anyone watching? I know you shared a lot of great nuggets. I think that, a lot of people at home are probably writing down as we go, but any final parting shots?
I would just offer this. I mean, when we talk about the changes that we will see in the marketplace after this whole crisis is over, as difficult as that seems to believe at the moment, what I would say is this: there are two sort of camps of opinion. There are those that believe that everything will change, and there are those that believe that there's a good chance that nothing will change, that consumers will go right back to the way they were, and that brands will sort of relegate back to familiar territory, and that will carry on as though nothing happened. I believe the truth is somewhere in the middle. We've seen coping behaviors on the part of brands and consumers to get through the crisis. Some of those coping behaviors will become embedded behaviors and habits. So we're going to be tracking this as it unfolds. I'm actually in the process of writing a book right now about the pandemic and its impact on retail. So I'm watching these things closely. But I think the bigger point and the more overarching point is this: we have an opportunity in this industry to fix a lot of the things that were really broken. We know that frontline workers right now who are being called heroes by the companies they work for are not treated like heroes outside of crisis. They're treated like low-paid, interchangeable cogs in the system. And I think we, as consumers, have to take some responsibility for that, and we have to change our behavior as it pertains to frontline staff. I think we also have to really look at our impact on the planet now. I think if COVID-19 tells us anything, it tells us that we are a very, very small global neighborhood. And what happens in one country can show up in another country very, very quickly. In other words, our impact is felt around the world. And so we have an opportunity to fix a lot of things in retail that I think were dysfunctional or fundamentally broken. And if we miss that opportunity, that will be the true tragedy of COVID-19, is that it happened and we didn't use it as the opportunity to make the retail industry better for the world.
Yeah. No, absolutely agree, Doug. Really poignant thoughts there, I think, to close up our conversation, because I think a lot of people are going through those thoughts and feelings now. They're thinking more critically about when and how they shop, the human impact of their individual actions, leading to a lot of internal thought and reflection. So two tasks or assignments, so to speak, do that self-reflection for yourself as a consumer, yourself as a business leader, what impact do we make as an organization? And then the second layer to that, I think, is, how can we swiftly adapt so we can, ensure that we're there for the customer, regardless of how their behaviors may evolve as a result of this, because, we have some inklings, but the severity of it, the acceleration of these trends, that remains to be seen. So again, really fantastic takeaways, I think, for everyone watching. Doug, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks again so much for taking the time.
Likewise, Alicia, my pleasure. Thanks.
And thanks everyone out there for watching. Take care.